Welcome to Rocking Our Priors. I'm your host, Dr. Alice Evans. Now, here is a question. Is low fertility a problem? What's the data? What's driving the decline? And what can be done? To answer these questions, I am joined by the brilliant, the fantastic, and the hilarious Jesús Fernández-Villaverde. Welcome.
Thank you, Alice. I don't know about hilarious. Let's work on that.
No, you are. You have me in hysterics. And when I tell people, other economists, that you're coming on this podcast, everyone, universities, he's my favorite economist. He's so creative. He's so productive. You have thousands and thousands of fans who are very, very excited for this.
Good to know.
Okay, let's start with the wealth of working nations. So your paper shows that cross-country variation in economic growth is tightly linked to the size of the working age population. Can you tell me, what are the main causal mechanisms by which fertility affects economic growth?
Okay, so basically at a very fundamental level is just the evolution of the working force. So let's think about the basic national accounting identity. Output growth is equal to productivity growth per worker plus the growth of the working age population. If think about for a second a situation where the growth of productivity is roughly the same across different countries, but you have big differences in the growth of the number of workers, you are going to have big differences in total output growth. And the best example is the US versus Japan. So you pick up the Financial Times, you pick up the Economist, you pick up the Wall Street Journal. All of them will tell you, Japan, such a disaster, no economic growth for the last 30 years. We need to write 10,000 books about it and have 10,000 podcasts. In fact, that was the reason I started writing that paper, because I look at the data and I said, look, Japan, in terms of productivity per worker, is doing okay. It's doing roughly the same that the United States. The problem is because Japan had such a gigantic drop in fertility in the 1970s, the total amount of workers in Japan, or if you want to be more precise, of people on working age that could work if they wanted, has been dropping a lot. So in the US, there are 30% more people on working age than in 1990. In Japan, I think it's around 15% less. So there you have 45% difference in total output growth. And I have to come to the conclusion that there is something like 500 papers in American Economic Review about the problems of Japan, and all 500 of them are completely useless. There is nothing wrong with Japan except that there are fewer Japanese. That's it.
Wow, I think that's so powerful, right? So if people are generators of innovation, if people are generators of ideas and entrepreneurship, is it possible that we can fix some of these problems with AI? Can AI, transform the production function?
Yeah, I know. Okay, so first of all, let me be honest. The jury is still out. Okay, so in 10, 20 years, we will come back and maybe a lot of the answers I gave to that question will sound a little bit silly. Now, after this caveat, let me tell you how I think about it. I'm very influenced, by the way, on this, both on my own work, because I have worked a lot on deep learning myself, and also on the work of Daron Acemoglu, who I think is the person who has thought the hardest and the deepest about this. I think that artificial intelligence is going to help. I think artificial intelligence is a good idea, but it's not going to be as transformative as people think. And let me give you a very simple example. Imagine that we substitute your primary care doctor or your family doctor by a fantastic artificial intelligence bot. Okay, this is the best bot ever. You go to the doctor and I say, doctor, I have this pain over here in my back. And that bot gives you always the perfect answer, the answer that will have given you the best doctor in the world. What happens with GDP?
Well, it depends how old you are, I guess. If you're 70 and you're extending that longevity, then maybe you're affecting the demographic ratios.
This is the national health system in the UK.
Yes.
It will actually go down. Let
Okay,
me tell you why. How do we account for National Health Service or any other health service in other countries? By the cost.
Right, yes.
So if we go from having to pay a doctor £1,000 for taking care of Alice to an vote that cost us £2, actually measure GDP goes down by 98%. Now,
Yes.
your welfare went up.
Yes,
Your
yes,
quality
yes,
went up. You're much
yes.
better off. I'm not denying that, but output did not. So
Right.
we are going to have in the funny situation that we are going to have more and more fantastic goods and services in our life that are nearly zero production cost, and then they are not going to show up as output. Let me
But is
give you
that a
an
problem in our calculations?
yes, I'm going to get to that. But let
Okay,
me
sorry.
just give you another example. Sorry, let me give you just another example. I love books. Some people do know me. And so it used to be the case that whenever I went back to Spain, I'm originally from Spain, as probably people can tell from my funny accent, I will always go back with two bags. One bag will be full with clothes, the second bag will be empty. Why? Because I will go to my favorite bookstore in Madrid. It's a history social science bookstore, and I will buy 60 books. And then I will fill the bag and bring it with me back to Philadelphia. Around 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we had Kindle. I don't do that anymore. Now I open Kindle and I buy whatever. Alice tells me, oh, this is such a great book that you need to buy. And I buy it right away, like 2 seconds later. Okay? Well, the interesting thing is all these books I'm buying now from Kindle used to be $40, $30. Now they are $5, $6. So measure GDP went down, despite the fact that my life is much better because I can buy many more books. I don't need to carry that gigantic bag full of books through the airport. I don't need to wait 6 months until next time I go to Madrid. This is what is going to happen, I think, with a lot of the great things that artificial intelligence does. It's going to make our life much, much better. I don't deny that. It's not going to matter much for output. Now, why is this important? Because it's, for instance, the reason I care about output is because I want to tax something to pay for public debt. What can I tax? So I think that, yes, artificial intelligence can be fantastic. I don't think people is really thinking carefully about the fact that a lot of the benefits of artificial intelligence are not taxable.
Is there not a way we can get around that?
I wish I knew, because I will be writing that paper. I have been thinking a lot about it, but what can we do? Like put a tax on Netflix? How much? So we have this fantastic new TV show on Netflix. So, we are going to have like a VAT, a value added tax of 50% on that show on Netflix. I'm not quite sure how we can do it. And I'm not quite sure, not in the, I'm not sure, a skeptic. No, it's in, honestly, I wish I knew how we can do it. Now, coming back to your point before, yes, I think that output as a measure of something is becoming worse and worse.
Okay? Right, okay.
Actually, one of my, here I am at Penn, Simon Kuznets used to be here like many, many decades ago. And here, together with Richard Stone at Cambridge in the UK, came up with the modern ideas of what gross domestic product is. And I think they did a fair job. It's not perfect. Nothing is perfect in life. But they did a fair job to account for what the United Kingdom economy was in 1935. So what does the United Kingdom do? Well, in 1935, you dig a lot of coal in Wales, you take it to Glasgow, and you use it to run the furnaces that help to have a steel to build a big ship in Glasgow, in the Glasgow shipyards. Okay, so I'm the national accountant. I go to Wales. I see, this many buckets of coal, this much steel, this many ships. I put it together, and that kind of gives me a sense of the size of the UK economy. The problem is we are moving more and more into this society, in this economy, where it is not clear even what the definition of GDP is, and artificial intelligence is going to make that even more complex. And that's why I think that even if artificial intelligence is going to help, it's not the panacea, the mother of all solutions for our problems related with fertility.
Okay, so let me summarize so far. You're saying that the size of the working age population matters because people are generators of ideas, and that's a primary driver, a structural determinant of structural transformation and growth and productivity. And even if some AI can do some of those things, then the problem is, how do you tax AI? How do you get the government revenue to build all those essential services? So let me have, if that's a fair summary, let me have. Okay, let me make two points. So one is, okay, so we need government services to pay for stuff, but could we make paying for stuff a bit cheaper? So for example, can you solve a bunch of old age issues by having robots. When I'm decrepit and lying on the floor, can a robot pick me up or something like that? And the other question, I guess, is, so what I was saying earlier, and perhaps I didn't phrase it well, is I worry that AI development is shaped by market demand, and at the moment you see a lot of that being directed into longevity. So AI is not necessarily improving productivity. It could be directed to making rich people have much longer lives. And the issue then is then you get a pensions problem, that you're not solving the production of, you're not increasing output, you're just increasing that dependency ratio.
Yeah, exactly. So no, you're absolutely right. So let me that in your question there are several issues. So let me take one at a time. So first of all, you're absolutely right. Technological development is market driven. The fundamental core of any type of market development is market size. And if we are going to have a lot of extremely wealthy people living in California who are 80 years old, we are going to have a lot of artificial intelligence developments that are catered for people who live in Santa Barbara and are 80 years old.
Yeah. They have a great life. I was there for 5 months this year. They have a fab life.
The issue over here is they are going to have an even better life. And that may not help us. So, I in general tend to be sympathetic towards the idea that markets can get a lot of things right, but that doesn't imply they always get things right, especially when we have a government that is interacting with this type of situations. So on that, I'm 100% with you. And that's why we should have things like the National Science Foundation or other types of research institutions founded by government money that try to help the direction of technological change in ways that we want as a society that goes beyond, what the extremely wealthy person in Santa Barbara wants.
May I just interrupt and criticize myself and then ask you to criticize me, criticizing myself? So do you think that longevity medicine, if it were to work out, do you think it would be a net bad for the size of the working age population or a net good? Because it's possible that longevity medicine could make me more productive in my 90s. Maybe I'll be cracking out my blogs and my podcasts when I'm 110. That's one possibility. Or another possibility is that they'll just be perpetually saving me from cancer and I'll be like teetering on the edge, increasing the... So like, and so those two different worlds. And then could you maybe flesh out a bit how you think that government could direct technology? Like, you suppose you've got these rich guys in Santa Barbara who want to live forever. Would you ban it? Would you stop? I mean, I just wonder what you think.
So let me take the first one. So I think that if we handle it well, longer life expectancy is probably good as a whole. Okay. It creates challenges, but first of all, I think that we really need to start thinking about ways in which, in some sense, the 70s are the new 60s. You see people, and you see it in academia all the time, you see people who are like 75 and you're still cranking papers. And I cannot believe you're 75 because you really don't look like you're 75. Now, maybe not everyone want to be, when they are 75, cranking papers and working 12 hours a day, but I also think there's a lot of rewarding things one can do. And maybe instead of working 8 hours, you want to work 6 hours or 4 hours. So actually something I have been defending is that as a society, we need to start thinking about ways in which we move away from this crazy, either you work 8 hours a day or 0 hours a day. And we need to do it also in a way that is not, as in many European countries, that you only get a part-time job because you couldn't do anything better with your life. Okay, so I can perfectly see many of my colleagues saying, now I'm 65, I want to transition into something a little bit easier, but I still have a lot of things to contribute to society, and I think we should really work on that. So if we can, and I think that governments over there play a role in coordinating behavior.
Do you think this, sorry to interrupt again, I don't know if you saw it, but Daron and others, they have a new paper on the rise of age-friendly jobs. For example, work from home is enabling, you to crank out papers.
Yes, so I can even imagine. Look, let me give you the example of my own dad. So my dad used to work for a very large multinational corporation, and it was a very demanding job and very taxing. And he wanted to retire, and he was offered another job. It was much more relaxed. He was going to be the director of a museum, and for some personal reasons he didn't take it. But the good thing about that, it was a small museum. It's not a big museum, okay? No, don't think about the British Museum, which is probably a high stage job. This was a very small museum, like 2 people show up a day. And I thought that as a society, we will be much better off if we have this type of age-friendly. Look, think about myself. Imagine that, tomorrow I win the lottery and I make 200 million pounds. I will be bored to death if I wake up in the morning and I don't have anything to do. Now, do I really want to do that referee report for American Economic Review? Probably not. Sorry, if the editor is listening to me, I promise I do them well, but, jury, I do my best with the referees, but, it's not the most fun thing either. So if I had 200 million pounds or I was 75 years old, maybe I would like to have in academia a position that allows me to do things that I find really fun and maybe have a few more afternoons free and spend more time with my friends and my family. And I think that as a society, this is very important, and governments do play a role. They do play a role in coordination, okay? Let me give you a very simple example. In the US, a lot of life is structured about, and this actually is going to link with our conversation later on fertility, about the time where local schools open and local schools close, because that imposes tight limits on families with kids. Okay, so maybe what we need to do is think about, as a society, when do we want our schools to open and when do we want our schools to close? As a society, we may want to think about, at what time we organize a lot of things in such a way that makes it a much more age-friendly society and also a much kid-friendly society, and we can get a little bit of good things out of it. You were asking me, how
Let me just add on that. I think that's a massive issue for Latin America. In a whole host of Latin American countries, you've got schools ending at 2 p.m. And in some ways, this is governments trying to save money by having the double day. You get some kids in the morning and it's just chaos. What kind of woman would want to do that? Because then you take a massive hit in terms of part-time work. You can't commute because there's crappy infrastructure, there's crappy commuting. And so you're opting into being a low status, low paid woman with a part-time job, but it's nothing. So I 100% agree that.
And look, I spent, joking. We were joking about Santa Barbara. I actually did spend a month at Santa Barbara at the start of the year. UC Santa Barbara invited me, and what I realized, it was very interesting. I was talking with people over there who were, in good jobs, and I was very surprised that a lot of them start working at 6 a.m. And I say, why so early? Well, there is a 3 hours difference between LA, California time, and New York time. And these are people working in the financial sector. They want to be at 9 New York time. So the fact that the sun in Santa Barbara is still at 6 a.m. doesn't really matter for them. And that's the issue I was mentioning about coordination. And governments, and I don't want to be heavy-handed, okay? I'm also very concerned about, Sir Humphrey Appleby ruling our lives. But I think that governments have nudges that can help society to coordinate in allocations of time that are more flexible, more friendly to a very wide variety of family and ages. And that I think that governments are not really thinking very hard about this.
Yeah, that's true. Though I think probably, you correct me, but the biggest hit or the biggest improvement in age-friendly jobs would probably be COVID. COVID forcing everyone to go online, businesses to develop the infrastructure. And going back to the example of our parents. So my mother is a lawyer and she retired before COVID. Then they had a demand for lawyers. So they called her back and it was fine because she could do it all from home. If you don't have to commute to London, if my mother can just log in and then still have massive billable hours, great for her. She'll sign on for that.
Of course, and probably the interesting thing is, well, I don't know the details, but I wouldn't be surprised if she's actually happier. A little bit of extra income.
Yes. Feeling that she's doing something, keep her busy.
Exactly. And I think that really we really need to. So think about it this way. And now I'm getting a little bit philosophical, but you will forgive me. Life, the way we have organized life is very odd because you basically spend the first 20, 22 years of your life studying, accumulating human capital. And then you spend the next 30 or 40 years of your life working like crazy. And then you take 40 years of leisure.
Yeah, it's a bit fragmented.
Exactly. Why do you want to do it like that?
Though I think I maybe would push back. So you and I both love our jobs and, maybe your father in the museum, that's super, super fulfilling. And my mother gets a big kick out of law. The many people have jobs that they find tedious and tough and tiresome and bosses that are rude, exploitive, or whatever. Many of those people, especially those in doing manual labor, I guess, you know, I don't know how much wiggle room or how excited they are. Would be, you've seen the protests in France when they
Yes,
propose extending the
yeah,
pension age,
yeah,
right?
I know,
They're
I know.
not happy about that.
I know, no, no, no. So I know I need to be aware. If you are a truck delivery guy from Amazon, you are not saying, "Oh, I wish I could, deliver packages to rich people for 5 more years." No, no, and that's what I was saying. I don't want to do this in a heavy-handed way.
Yeah.
Uh, I, I'm a big fan of the idea that governments, a big role of a modern government is into expanding people's options. Okay. And in fact, if we get your mother or my dad to work a little bit longer, they are still going to pay income taxes. That is what is going to allow us to have the financing for a welfare state that will still make it feasible from a pure budgetary consideration that the Amazon worker retires at 65.
Yes.
The way
Yes.
I would put it is, yes, you are an Amazon worker, you still want to retire at 65, but I'm doing this precisely because of you. Because why I'm going to force someone to retire when he's 60 or she's 65, when he may want to still continue working. So I keep saying that all the time when I propose some of these policies. I want to increase people's options. I don't want to force anyone into. Believe me, there is not a social engineer inside me trying to say this is the way you want to live your life. What I have realized as I grow a little bit older is that people have very different preferences, and I whenever I talk with my graduate students, it's the first thing I tell them. So look, I'm perfectly fine. If you tell me you want a job in academia, that's great. If you want a job in industry, that's great. If you want a job, I don't know, in the policy world, it's great. I'm here to help you. So just tell me the truth. Don't try to game the system because it's not going to work. So it's a little bit the same. I don't want, if you don't want to work, you want to go back home and just watch football on the TV for the rest of your life. Yeah. Okay. Let's think about how a society can deliver that. On the other hand, I'm a true believer that many people are going to find meaningful jobs that they are going to enjoy. And if there are really in a society many, many nasty jobs like those ones we were mentioning before, maybe we should also take a step back and think about, what is wrong with the US or the UK economy that is creating so many of these lousy jobs? And maybe there is something we can do at the margin. Again, I don't think we are going to look at the end of the day. Someone will always need to do something unpleasant and not very nice. But as you were saying, nasty bosses. Can we have different systems of human relations or industrial relations, as you guys say, within companies that minimizes abusive bosses? And I
Yeah, and
think that,
absolutely, and maybe AI will help with the horrific manual jobs. As we have better
yeah,
technology and infrastructure,
exactly.
you don't need to lift a heavy box. So that will be a great thing for
Yeah,
manual labor.
yeah,
Okay, so let's continue with this theme of government coordination. So we've got this issue that we care about the size of the working age population because people are generators of ideas. Now, Lance Pritchett has a great new paper, and he estimates that for rich countries
yeah,
to maintain current demographic ratios, that is the size of the
yeah.
working age population, they will need by 2050 to be about 50% immigrant. What do
Yes.
you think of those kinds of calculations?
Yeah. So they are basically right. I mean, I did the same exercise for Spain, and yes, basically Spain will need to be around 45, 49% immigrant. The Bank of Spain did the same numbers. Uh, okay, so immigration. I know that immigration is the third rail of politics, especially in Europe these days. My view about immigration has always been that the virtue is in the middle. So let me tell you what I mean by that. I think it's good for a society to have immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself into the United States. I'm much better off in my life because I migrated to the US. And I hope that at least some of my undergrads do not think life is so awful because they need to suffer me for 90 minutes every Wednesday and Monday. On the other hand, like everything in life, you don't want to do too much too fast. Okay? Bringing huge inflows of immigrants causes a lot of disruption, causes a lot of cultural and social change, and these things have backlash. And we are seeing that in Europe right now.
Yeah, with Austria, for example.
Yes, actually. And you just think about, European countries where parties with a very, very strong anti-immigration stand are either number one, two, or three. It's pretty much now everyone. Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, Germany, Austria, even the United Kingdom. Do I think we have experiences of large countries? I'm not talking about a small country like Singapore, of large countries that can successfully handle 50% of immigrants. I don't think so. I don't think we can do it. Okay. And this may be a pessimistic assessment. I'm not saying we should not do it. Yes, it's making a statement about societies and how humans are. And this is such a deep, fundamental social change that is going to be very difficult. That tells me that just naively saying, oh, immigration is going to fix our problems, I don't think it's really thinking very carefully about all these issues. We were talking before, and maybe the listeners will appreciate this, about the importance of culture. And culture is important. And it's one of the things I always found a little bit frustrating, that macroeconomists do not try to think harder about it. Well, if you think that culture is important, then a deep cultural change induced by migration needs to be important. It can be for good. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. It can be for good. Put a few more Spaniards in your life and you will improve your restaurant scene at night. But it comes with a change. And we need to understand that. And the last thing I wanted to say also about migration is that we need to be very careful, because we live in a welfare state. Okay? So when I was explaining this yesterday, when an Italian migrant comes from Italy to New York in 1900, he lands in New York and he's pretty much on his own. When a Venezuelan migrant comes to the United States in 2024, if he comes legally, he immediately qualifies for a lot of welfare state considerations. And now the welfare state is redistribution. That's why we have welfare states. We like redistribution, so we want to have a welfare state. Well, that means that people that have carefully to look at the net contributions of migrants tend to find that from the perspective of the welfare state, I'm not talking about society as a whole, but from the perspective of the welfare state, unless you are at the top 20, 25% of the income distribution, you are a net loss for the welfare state. Okay? Now, this will perhaps explain why countries like Canada, and I think currently the United Kingdom, is trying to move much more towards a system of bringing like high-skilled immigrants. But it tells you that it's not even clear, if we forget about all the cultural and social issues associated with migration, that bringing 50% of immigrants is really fixing a lot of the problems of the welfare state. And look, I know that talking about migration is very difficult. I know there is a lot of not very nice people talking about migration, but we have, in some sense, by trying to avoid these issues, not have a very rational debate about migration, and that's not good for anyone. And the problem is, look, if you don't have a rational debate about issues, you are leaving the ground to the irrational people to talk about it. When something is important, I keep telling that to my friends, when we talk about many issues, it doesn't need to be migration. I say, look, if you don't want to touch this issue because you think it's controversial or it can be difficult to address, and we are the rational ones, since this is an objective issue, the only thing that you are going to get is the irrational people filling in the debate, and it's worse for everyone. So I think we need to talk a little bit about this and try to think about how we do it in a very extremely respectful way, in a democratic way, in a way that we don't violate the human rights of absolutely anyone, but we need to understand this has consequences. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, that was perfect. I just want to say two little things on that. So you say, immigration has been tried in Singapore, but it's small. And I think I have a slightly different read on Singapore, in that it's not just small, it's also extremely authoritarian. And it has a very totalitarian nation style. And in fact, some of the totalitarian top-down nation building is very similar to what happened in earlier countries like France in the 19th century. So, for example, in Singapore, they have very strict mandates on the housing development boards, in that there are certain ratios of ethnic integration, and they make sure that everyone lives in the same environment and sings from the same hymn sheet. And they're very strict on any kind of polarization or ghettos, etc. And in fact, they do very similar things to what France did as as part of its nation building, in that it was extremely illiberal, in that it used secular schooling to stamp in homogeneity. It repressed, regional languages. And I was reading Amy Chua's book on Thailand. They were very, very repressive of the Chinese minority in the early 20th century. They totally stamped out cultural heterogeneity. But as you were saying, current liberal respect for human rights and willingness to respect diverse cultures and welcome them and have that liberal ethos means that harsh, repressive, Singaporean or 19th century France model of nation building is just politically inappropriate and feasible, and no one will support it. So if you have a liberal culture and you welcome diverse people in, but you're not taking that very heavy-handed repressive approach to building social cohesion and nation building and forcing everyone to be the same, then you could have difference. And those difference, and as people stick to their own, understandably, as everyone wants to stick to their own, we all have our homogenous friendship groups, but that may inhibit the kind of community and nation building and social cohesion, which is
Let me give you also another, because I actually have thought about this a little bit, the presence of the internet. So it is still, I know, after all these years in the US, the first thing I check is the newspaper of my hometown.
Really?
Okay, I haven't been there like in 30 years. I actually know more about details of local politics in my small hometown than in Philadelphia. Doesn't make any sense, okay? Because I don't live there, whatever, so if we are having a dispute about trash collection, just pick something that is as apolitical I can imagine. And I actually know more about the disputes of trash collection in my hometown than in Philadelphia. But it's who you are.
Yeah. People cherish those identities, and if well harnessed, those identities can enable innovation. Like Joe Henrik has a new paper where it's all kind of people bring together. They come with their own ideas, they come with their own innovation, and that's fabulous. I wanted to highlight another thing that I think mediates the impact of immigration, because I was in Toronto for 3 months last year, visiting the University of Toronto there. And one big issue is that even though they have these super high skilled migrants who are all fabulous, and it's a wonderfully diverse city, and I absolutely love Toronto, the government has not played the coordinating role you stress in stepping up housing supply. And so as a result, you have this massive, incredibly expensive to rent, and that turns people against migrants. So again, that's an important coordinating role.
Exactly. No, exactly. And so let me, because I actually have thought about this in the context of Spain. Yes, we had a huge immigration inflow. In Spain is slightly different because a lot of that immigration inflow is from Latin America, but that has really pushed the prices in Madrid in particular. In Madrid. So a lot of people is very unhappy. And what I feel is a lot of the mainstream political parties, since they don't want to talk about this possible backlash from immigration or this possible negative aspect of immigration, they don't talk about the issue and say, no, look, if you bring 1 million people from Colombia, as Spain has done, that's probably good for Spain. We should welcome them. But you need to put them in some place. And just denying that this problem exists because you don't want to give a space to the radical right is actually counterproductive.
Yes.
So,
now, I want to ask one question I should have asked you earlier when we were talking about the causal mechanisms, the relationship between demographics and growth. If demographic trends continue, how do you think that will affect pensions and public services?
Well, I can tell you already what is happening across Europe. You look at pretty much every European country, and all the increase, in fact, more than 100% of the increase in public expenditure over the last 20 years has gone into pensions. So the way I put it in an interview a few years ago, which a lot of people misinterpreted, so I'm going to try to be a little bit more careful now, is that pension is this big monster that is growing and eating everything else within the government budget. So, probably many of your listeners may know that recently Mario Draghi published this report on competitiveness in Europe. And one of the things that Mario Draghi highlights is that Europe right now is investing very little on public infrastructure. We are not rebuilding our highways. We are not rebuilding our infrastructure at large. And in particular, there is much less money we will need to do the transition to net zero, to decarbonizing the world economy. The problem is, if you give me the Spanish budget, if you give me the French budget, if you give me the German budget, we have this extremely fast aging process. Once you satisfy your commitments towards social security, to pensions, there's not that much money left. And that's you can see already. I think that a lot of the problem that Europe is having right now is already about that. And we need to sit down and think about, well, how are we going to fix this? And again, I'm not so Paul Samuelson, one of the greatest economists of the 20th century, had this great analogy that I love, which he was saying, look, the economist is a little bit like a travel agent. When there was travel agents, not anymore, because now you go to Expedia. But anyway, so there was a time where there were travel agents, and you go to your travel agent and you tell her, look, I want to go to Paris or I want to go to Berlin. And what she's going to do is help you to do it in the most efficiently way, most efficient way. That's what I feel my job as an economist who likes to get involved in the policy debate is about. I don't want to prejudge as a society how we are going to fix the problems of social security. I have my own, as a citizen, of course, I have my own personal preferences. But I think that my role as a quote unquote public intellectual, if I may give myself that label, is try to lay down in the best possible way, to the best of my understanding, what are the options, what are the numbers. And what I keep telling people in Europe is demographic trends are such that we have a gigantic pension problem. And that gigantic pension problem is not a pension problem in 2040. It's a pension problem in 2024 that has already completely eaten our ability to invest in infrastructure. And that has already happened. And we need to think, what are we going to do? Maybe the answer is nothing. We are just going to live with it. Or maybe the answer is we need to change our economy. I don't know. But I get a little bit frustrated about the extent to which a lot of the conversation is still denying the facts more than talking about possible solutions. So pensions is already a problem and is already the absolute driving force behind budgetary decisions in every country in the continent.
Thank you. One more thing, I was just thinking, and you'll correct me, I wonder if aging populations and people not dying means that your housing supply stays low.
Yes.
Because the housing isn't being released to the market. People are just sitting in it.
And in fact, so let me tell you something I have been thinking a little bit about. Our tax systems, in addition to why this encourage a lot people downsizing because of the capital gains. So imagine I have a big house in my suburb where I live. I live in a fancy suburb with a big house. If in some moment I decide to downsize because maybe I'm older and I want to keep a much smaller house, I will need to pay tons of money on taxes. So it's actually not even clear I'm better off. And you see it, in front of where I live, there is an old, very nice lady, and she has, I don't know about her life situation, but it's a very big house, and probably she's making this calculation. I don't want to move to a small condo because I will probably need to pay, 30%, 40% of my capital gains, and I'm actually not going to be better off at all. So again, coming back to the issues of what things government can do is let's think about ways in which we can release big houses back into the market as people age and they don't need to suffer this big disincentive of paying very high capital gains taxes. Now, we want to do it also in a way that is fair, because of course this old lady of my neighbor, she has also made a lot of money out of this. So, she needs to contribute to the pile, okay? But we need some way of equitable way in which we balance providing her the incentive to move to a smaller house with you need to pay a fair contribution to the budget. And yes, and let me tell you another place. Since we are academics, we are going to be slightly narcissistic.
They always are. They're so narcissistic.
Oh, I know. I always make the joke that
I think there are more academic papers about academia than there are about sub-Saharan Africa or something like that.
Which is absolutely no. Not only there are more papers about academia, there are more papers about top academic institutions.
Yeah, that's what people really care about. Yeah.
Anyway, no, but so think about, and I think this is already happening in humanities, at least in the US. Since people are much healthier and much their academic careers last much longer, they are not retiring, which means there are not openings for younger scholars.
Yeah. Did you see there's a nice paper on this?
Oh, I didn't know that. I should check it out.
It's this
Maybe that's
Bovella
cool.
paper. Basically, it's not an academia per se, so you'll
Yeah,
forgive
yeah,
me. But they look at the America, they look at Italy, they look at a bunch of countries, and they
okay,
find that young men are
yeah,
much less likely to be promoted so quickly. And they
yes,
argue it's because older workers are staying in their jobs.
yes,
So they're just hogging up the
yeah,
senior ranks, and this is causing a wage compression between young men and young women. So previously, say
yeah,
like
yeah.
Mad Men, a
Okay,
guy would just jump up to that corner
yeah,
office.
yeah,
Now he's just staying in the bottom ranks with
yeah,
everyone else.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so I can tell you that I 100% believe that paper because of my own personal observation. So I went to the fancy business school in Spain, the fancy business school in Spain. Okay, fortunately enough, I decided that being an academic was way more interesting than making money. But anyway, the best generation ever to go to business school in Spain was between 1985 and 1990. You know why? Because it was right after Spain joined the European Union. So the Spanish economy had this big boom. And in particular, there were like all these multinationals and all these firms that were setting up offices in Madrid. So you are a McKinsey of the world. You don't have an office in Madrid. So you open your office in 1986. Well, I don't know when McKinsey did it, but this is just a stand-in for a generic firm. You are hiring someone graduating from business school right at that time. You fast track him, because at that time it was probably him still. You fast track him into partnership. His partner by 1990, he's still sticking around. And when
Yeah,
I
for
talk
sure,
with my
100%.
friends working in consulting, in investment banking, in auditing, in all these type of professional firms, they are telling you there are no new partnership positions open because the guys who got partner in 1989, they are still around and they don't have any incentive to retire.
And the
And
age-friendly jobs, they can do it, work from home, etc., etc.
exactly, exactly. So again, that's another point where we need to think about how we do this. And at the university, I see it, but it's a really difficult problem. What I want people to take home with them is that this is really difficult because if I have this great historian, writing papers when he's 75, I don't want this person to retire either.
Yeah.
I remember I was just recently. I like. I don't know. No, you don't have any relation with Richard Evans, no, even if it's just the same last name.
No.
Okay, so I like Richard Evans a lot because he has written all these books about Germany, and I'm really very interested in the history of Germany for many reasons. He just published a new book, and you look at Richard Evans, and especially after he retired, I think he was at Cambridge. After he retired from Cambridge, he has published like these 15 books. Okay, and I was thinking, wow, in some sense, it's such a pity he cannot have graduate students anymore. He cannot teach undergrads at Cambridge. But on the other hand, if we have this Richard Evans at Cambridge, you are kind of blocking the next person coming in. And I really don't know how to do this. I really don't know how to handle it in a way that we keep the Richard Evans of the world publishing fantastic books and contributing to the university while not disencouraging the young people. And aging is a big thing. Aging is really such a transformative thing that now your academic career can go all the way to 90. I was just recently in a conference and Tom Sargent was there, and I think that Tom is 82 or 83. And he just gave a paper way better than mine. And I was like, wow, this guy is 82 and he's still beating me at this game. So that's, you see the point.
No, absolutely. So, okay, let me summarize so far. So, we're saying that the size of the working age population really matters for idea generation, innovation, and output, which of course is taxed and contributes to pensions, public services, a whole range of issues. And immigration could be one thing, and immigration can be super, super valuable for innovation and expanding that output. But it also comes with some cultural issues and possible political backlash, which we've seen in Europe. And okay, so then my next question is this. So let's think about fertility. And I want to start with the data. So the UN has some population predictions. What do you think of those predictions? Are they too optimistic? Are they about right?
Okay. I don't believe them. That was actually, I just gave a seminar about that yesterday.
Oh, okay. I promise you I'm not stalking.
No, that's fine. No, I'm more happy. As a true academic, I don't have any problem with the stalkers. I think that, my dream in life is to have groupies that, when I arrive to the airport over there in Boston, there are like 10 groupies waiting for me. No. Okay. So the United Nations assumes two things. Well, first of all, let me tell listeners what the United Nations says,
Yes.
and then why I don't believe it.
Yes, thank you.
So the United Nations says that the total fertility rate of the planet in 2024 is 2.25. Just a little bit above replacement level. And by the way, many people think that the replacement level is 2.1. That's only true in rich advanced economies. In poorer economies, it's lower, it's higher, sorry. So the replacement rate for humanity is probably around 2.20. So we are nearly there in terms of replacement rate. That means that according to the United Nations, the world population will peak in the year 2084 and then start falling after that. So the United Nations already agrees with the basic point. We are going to get to the peak very soon. 2084 is 60 years from now. Okay, so, I may not be around in 60 years. You may be around.
See.
Let's hope. Let's go to the gym tonight and let's skip those two martinis. No, but the very interesting thing is that even the United Nations projections are extremely sensitive to very, very small changes. And the United Nations recognizes that. What do I mean? We are trying to forecast a curve that is flattening. And what happens over there is when you are nearly at the peak, but not quite, for the last kind of 20 years, the world population is just going to be increasing by very, very little every year until you get to the peak. So even a very small difference will put you that the world peak, the peak of the world population can be 2060 or 2062 with the United Nations numbers. Now, this is what the United Nations says. We are getting to the peak of the world population in 2084. We are at that above replacement level. Now, why I don't believe the United Nations numbers? Exactly. And I even have a political economy model. First, I think the United Nations is overcounting the number of births in many countries. For instance, in Colombia, the United Nations claims in 2023 there were over 700 births. Colombian authorities, and I have talked with them, tell me there were 500,000.
That's a big difference.
Yes, this is not fighting about the second decimal.
Yeah, that's not small.
Exactly. Now, part of the reason for this is because fertility and births have been falling so fast, so quickly, that the United Nations is a little bit reluctant to adjust those numbers too quickly. The second problem, I think, and I have talked with a few real demographers, not just amateurs like me, who tell me the following. What the United Nations have been doing historically is the following. They go to a village in Peru and they say there were 100 kids being born, but we look at the vital registry, at the vital statistics, there were only 80 registered. So what we are going to do is from now on, we are going to bump vital statistics by up 20%. The problem is most of these surveys, to the best of my understanding, are from the 1980s. And it's very likely, and I think it's the most plausible scenario, where the level of under-registration has shrunk dramatically as these countries have developed better state capabilities. So I believe much more the data of the Colombians who promised me there were 500,000 people being born in Colombia that in the 700,000 of the United Nations.
So just to clarify, what you're saying is that the World Bank is adjusting for under-registered births.
The United Nations. Yes.
Sorry, did I say what did I say?
The World Bank.
Oh, I apologize. Wrong world multinational.
Yeah,
Well,
World Bank, nice people. Maggie, I know you are listening to me. You are a nice. You do it right.
okay, so the UN had a system,
Yeah.
and they're incorrectly adjusting for under-registered births.
Extremely aggressively.
Okay.
The second thing is Africa. Africa is a statistical gap. We don't really know how many kids were born in Nigeria. So the United Nations say last year there were, I don't remember from the top of my head, 7 million kids born in Nigeria. And they basically don't update those numbers. They basically have a model of how they think the number of births in Nigeria is going to change, and they equate the numbers that they put in their statistics to the number that the model gives.
Right. Okay.
My suspicion, my conjecture, and I want to be very clear, everyone should understand this is my conjecture, I may be wrong, is that there are no 7 million births in Nigeria. They are probably closer to 5 or 6.
So what about all their demographic health surveys? Like every couple of years, a lot of African girls.
Yes. And the really interesting thing, Alice, is that nearly all those surveys bring a fertility that is substantially lower. That the Economist ran a nice article about this a few years ago. Systematically, they come much lower than the United Nations numbers.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Now, how much of an adjustment we need to make? That remains an open question. Okay, so do we need to lower births numbers from the United Nations by 5%, by 10%, or by 20%? And this will make a difference. Okay? So what I do is the following. For Africa, I just take the United Nations birth numbers at face value. I don't know anything, and I want to be cautious. I want to build the most cautious scenario. But for countries in Latin America and East Asia, I substitute the United Nations numbers for their civil registry, for the vital statistics numbers, and what I think is a reasonable degree of undercounting. Which, by the way, even if you will never believe it, that degree of undercounting I'm getting from another survey of the United Nations. So this is very funny. So the United Nations is not applying to its numbers the degree of undercounting they report they think is the correct one. Why they're doing that? Well, we can come back to that later. Now, of course, I'm saying births, not fertility. And already one person once complained about this. Yes, but remember, fertility is computed from the number of births. So my suspicion is that the world fertility rate is not 2.25 as the United Nations says, but probably 2.18. Now, this is not a gigantic adjustment. I'm only going from 2.25 to 2.18, although the 2.18 does not correct at all for Africa. The difference, the 0.07 difference is just the difference of LATAM, Latin America, East Asia, etc. But I told you that the replacement level is 2.2 for the planet, which means we are already below replacement level as a species. Humankind is already below replacement level.
And of course, this matters for the Lamp-Pritchett argument, because if demographics are systematically undercounted in Latin America or other labor supplying countries, or people supplying countries, then you run out of immigrants sooner.
Exactly. Well, by the way, one very funny fact about the United Nations data, they consider there is going to be quite a bit of net migration into Earth in the 2040s.
Nice. I look forward to welcoming our neighbors.
Exactly. No, I just think, no, this is of course consequence of not doing the rounding properly. But anyway, I thought it was hilarious. Okay. So once you do that, so you correct the number of births and the number of fertility a little bit lower, and I follow my own forecast of fertility, and I come back to that in a second, I promise, I get that the peak of the world population will be 255.
Wow, a 30-year difference.
Yes. So now, most of it comes from the fact that I think that current fertility is a little bit lower, but a big chunk comes from what I was telling you before. The peak, since the curve is getting very, very flat, 30 years difference is actually not that much in terms of total amount of humans.
Right. Yes, I'm with
We are
you.
trying to forecast a peak, a mountain.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. So now, what happens with fertility projections of the United Nations? They are hilarious. I mean, I wish maybe I should put them online because I actually plot
But
them.
why
And
are
I
they
didn't.
so crazy? Like, these are clever people. Why are they just, coming up with inventing numbers?
So I sent them an email. And the answer we got, I'm doing this with a young researcher, Patrick Norris. We sent them an email, and they told us that they don't want to be alarmist. That's literally what they say in the email. They say, yes, maybe these projections do not make a lot of sense, but we want to be very cautious, and we don't want to be alarmist, and we don't want people to think there is a crisis looming. Which
is that really like that? Isn't their job? I mean, their job is to report numbers, and they don't want to do it because
I know, no, but look,
it sounds a bit like totalitarian Soviets. That wouldn't work well with.
No. In particular, because compare about this with their position on climate change. The United Nations have always been very, very vocal about the potential dangers of climate change. I will argue that in a couple of occasions, maybe a little bit too much.
All the World Health Organizations declaring pandemics or whatever,
Exactly.
like monkeypox, right? They declared that.
You don't say, I'm not going to declare a pandemic because it will create panic. Now, between you and me and everyone who's listening,
yeah, shush. Just between us.
And all the 2 million tweets we are going to get after this podcast is released. I think that this is a typical example of a bureaucracy that was built on the premise that the world population was exploding. Because yes, in the early 1960s, the world population was exploding, and that they predicated their whole mission in trying to tell the planet we need to control population growth, and that now that the situation is very, very quickly switching to a different scenario, it's very difficult for them to kind of switch gears and
right.
start
The whole vision is about population control, and it's hard to move to a different scenario.
And I got, I published a couple of papers on these things, and I got a couple of nasty comments on the media. First of all, imputing me motives, which I don't think they are based on anything objective. But again, saying, oh, how can you say that? The population is still growing so fast, blah, blah, blah. I say, I'm not saying that population is not growing, because there is, what demographers call momentum. And the world population is still growing around 0.8, 0.9% a year. I'm quoting from my head. But the problem is that growth rate is falling very, very fast. And what social science should be is about trying to forecast the future, and the future, I think, is very clear. And just trying to say, we don't want to be alarmist. It's not about being alarmist. I don't want people, to run for the doors and start thinking, that the world is about to end. I'm just trying to say there is going to be a very big problem. And coming back to the motives, what I try to emphasize to my audiences and to my friends is, I'm actually not that worried about the United States. I think the United States is going to do fine. The United States will always be able to bring enough immigrants. The United States is a resilient society that has much institutional depth that can handle a lot of the challenges. What really, really worries me is Colombia. What really, really worries me is Chile. What really, really worries me is Brazil. These are countries. Look, Alice, Colombia is already losing population because births have dropped so much. They still have a little bit of surplus of births over deaths, but Colombia has huge net migration towards Spain and the United States. So Colombia is already losing population. Colombia will probably have fewer births than deaths in another 3-4 years, given the current path. And what do we do with Colombia? I mean, I don't want to sound condescending, what do we do with Colombia? But this is a real problem. And let me tell you, you mentioned before Thailand. You know that Thailand already has fewer births than deaths.
Yes.
So what do we do with Thailand? How is Thailand going to be able to handle a sustained loss in population for the next 200 years?
And I wanted to... No, this is fantastic. In your paper, The Wealth of Working Nations, you focus on the ratio of the working age
Yeah,
population to total population.
yeah,
But I wonder if I could be a more pessimistic version
yeah.
and say, what about societies in the Middle East, North Africa, and South
Mhm.
Asia, where female employment is very, very low? We're talking
Mhm.
about below 20% female employment.
Yeah,
And so, in those circumstances, in the near future, one man may be supporting two sets of elderly parents. And so that's without government
yeah.
pensions, that's without social
I
security. It's
know, I
just
know,
a huge strain on young men's backs, right?
I
Which
know,
is
I know,
going
no,
to
no,
affect a whole range of things like investments and spending,
I
etc.
know, I know, and that's what I'm trying. Yeah, yeah, no, no, you're 100% right. Let's think about, if I were the. Have you looked at the fertility rates in Tunisia?
No, actually, I don't know them off by heart.
So they are already like at 1.4. It's amazing.
Wow.
I think they are below the United Kingdom already, or like
Wow.
about to be at the same level. And
Yeah,
as you
that's
say,
and Tunisia has female employment around 30%, I think. Yeah. So
exactly.
that's
So
a strain.
if I were the Minister of Finance of Tunisia, if I were the governor of the Central Bank of Tunisia, I could not sleep at night. By now, I'm probably an alcoholic because I need to get a couple of shots of bourbon every night before going to sleep.
Maybe not if you're Tunisian, though.
Yeah, no, I know, I know. Sorry, I realize that that's a culturally inappropriate joke, but
Take another poison.
exactly. No, but if I were a very senior official in Tunisia, I will be extremely, extremely worried. And as I was mentioning, I saw a couple of articles on the media, and I'm not going to, badmouth any particular person, so I'm not going to mention who they brought them. But again, they were saying, oh, this worry about fertility is about rich people worried about we are fewer and fewer rich people, and the poor nations of the world are going to overtake us. And say, no, 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 no. This is not about that. This is about Tunisia. And as
100%.
you say, it's a real problem for them. And look, this is going to have consequences. And at the end of the day, there are political outcomes. When you have, can I talk like an old-fashioned Marxist for a second?
Let's go. Yeah, I'm ready for some Marxism. Go for
Exactly.
it.
When
Yes,
there
yes,
are
thank you.
inner contradictions in the underlying structure of the economic.
Okay, now you've really gone hardcore. Okay, okay.
No, but I think that Marx got that right. When there are inherent tensions within the economic structure of a country, like as you say, look, low fertility, women stay at home because they cannot work, a lot of old people, and a corrupt and a corrupt political system that is not very democratic.
And low productivity of those workers, right?
Exactly.
So in many Middle Eastern economies, you've got these protected cronies, these
Yeah,
who get the government secured deals, but then you've
yes,
got these marginalized outsiders who are totally cut off, very low technology. So you've got terrible
exactly.
productivity of the working age population.
Exactly. And what Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels is going to tell you is this will not continue and something is going to give it. Okay?
Mm.
So exactly what will be that explosion, I don't know. Will be a revolution, will be a civil war, or some type of societal collapse. I don't know, because I don't think that, unfortunately, social sciences are at that level of Isaac Asimov, the psychohistory, where we can, predict everything. But what I look is, given what the fundamentals, now this is a little bit more kind of World Bank talk, the fundamentals of the Tunisian economy are so inherently weak
Yes.
that this demographic tsunami, this demographic winter about to hit them, is going to end up in something very unpleasant for
Yeah.
everyone.
Can I be even more pessimistic, please?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
let's be cheery. Yes,
No, no,
let's.
I just got one more pessimistic thing. I've
I
got
know.
one more pessimistic thing. So
Yeah,
going back to
yeah,
India, which
yeah,
has got a very male-heavy sex ratio, if you have
yes,
a male-heavy sex ratio and you have plummeting fertility, that means
yes.
you've got a surplus male population that is unable to find younger brides. And so that means that you have surplus men who are unable to achieve status and marriage, and that in China, where these what they call bare branches historically,
Yes.
lots of
Yeah.
male discontent.
No,
And I
no,
saw that in South Korea.
no, exactly, and I can already see it from China, which I know a little bit better. You really have millions of people who are in a difficult situation because they don't have partners and they are going to be very unhappy.
Yes.
Uh, so a friend of mine from college used to joke that the reason we had armies is because you need to keep males with high testosterone level in their late teenage years apart from society.
No,
And
you
can
have to deal with these surplus men. You have to deal with these surplus men. Absolutely. Whether
and
you're sending them off to colonize Latin America, which the Spanish
yeah,
did,
exactly.
you have to deal with these surplus men that you don't,
Or put
yeah.
them in prison, but you need to do something with them.
Yes.
And
Young
really,
men
India
with high testosterone and no status
very
and
the worst
frustration is a
of the worst.
bad thing.
It's a very bad thing. And I always tell people, look, a very simple way to tell it is, I like to go through life and think about life as an economist, everything I look at. I always say, notice every single person doing something crazy in the local highway. In the US, you British, you drive very nicely and you're very civilized. But in the US, you have all these people that jump in the ramp and they go like around through the side to the shoulder and they overtake 10 people in 1 second. Always, always, always a young male in their late tens in the
Yeah,
early
yeah.
because it's the only being on the planet that will do something so deeply stupid to save 30 seconds on the ramp is Jesus when I was 19 years old. I need to recognize that when I was 19 years old, I did that a couple of times.
Did you really?
Oh my God. I couldn't possibly comment.
I'm glad that we're getting a range of characters on there. We've got Marxists, we've got World Bank, and we've got you at 19. Okay, that's great.
Now I'm Francis Urquhart. You very well speak so, but I couldn't possibly comment. No. So and by the way, just tying down with a conversation we had a little bit before,
Yeah.
part of the reason why the replacement rate is a little bit higher than 2.1 is precisely because of the surplus males. Because what you try to do with 2.1 is to say, no, of each 205 birds, 105 are men, 100 are female.
Right.
But when you have selective abortions and you discriminate against girls, you actually need more total birds to have 100.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Tracking the total fertility of every woman won't work for replacement if you've got a male-heavy population. Yeah, for sure.
So that's part of the arguments I actually criticize the United Nations, because I don't think they are very open about this. And in China and in India, look, we are talking about half of the population, of the world population. They are extremely male-dominated because of selective abortions. Yes.
Yes, 100%. Okay, so what we're saying so far is that the size of the working age population matters for growth and pensions, but it's actually shrinking globally, and this is a huge issue for low and middle income countries. Now, I have another big question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have more caffeine. What's your theory about why this is happening?
I have the bourbon inside.
Yeah, I'm sure you do, since you're not Tunisian. Okay, what's your theory? What's your theory about why this is happening worldwide in places as diverse as Korea, India, Chile, Colombia?
Okay, so more than a theory, I'm going to give you a fact, which is 50% of a theory. Nearly all this drop, and we have talked about this before, is because we have a higher and higher percentage of women at zero kids.
Right.
If you actually condition on having at least one kid, we haven't seen much of a decline. In the case of the US, close to zero decline in fertility. What we are having is that a lot of women are choosing or being forced, we don't know that, to be at zero.
Right. Can you put a number on that? What percentage of these differences do you think is about women choosing to be childless forever?
Yeah, so basically in countries like the US, we have gone from around 90% of women having at least one kid to around 60 something. And, it still remains to be seen because, a lot of the young girls, they are still in their 20s, in their 30s. We need to wait until they are 50 to look at their completed fertility. So there is a little bit of an educated guess. But my no-cast is that of the younger generation, like of, the women in their 20s in the United States, around only 60% of them will end up having at least one kid.
Right, yeah, I was just looking today at the UK Gender and Generation Survey 2022-23, and they suggest it's not just the fact that young people are delaying fertility. When they ask them, do you want kids? A lot of them are saying no. And there's a very nice paper on Korea, Jisoo Hwang, and she highlights that there's just this rise of young women not getting married and remaining childless. And, there's questions about what's driving that. But yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
So it is the childless cat ladies.
Is the, yeah, is the
Or maybe I shouldn't say that. It is, yeah, it is. There are some women not having kids.
no, the I shouldn't say this, but you know,
No, 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 no. I apologize.
the
I
reason
apologize. I will keep this
yeah,
PC.
no, it's okay, it's okay.
I don't want to get you in
But,
trouble. Right, so
no,
let us be factual. Right, we go back
let
to factual.
purely,
More women are staying childless.
I started chatting. So that's why I'm saying it's half a fact, half a theory. Okay. So we don't need to go and start worrying about why, my neighbor who got married, she's having 3 kids. Yes. Her predecessor in the cohort in previous generation was also having 3 kids. So now what we need to understand is why so many women are deciding to remain childless. Now, here we are opening a lot of possible hypotheses.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have convinced me by sending me a lot of relevant papers and in our conversations that a big chunk of it is probably that there are fewer good husbands around or fewer good potential husbands. And I think that, by the way, that probably explains why these changes have been so fast and so dramatic in Latin America.
Yeah, for sure.
So my view of the world right now, and again, it's evolving, and I'm as Keynes will say, when the facts change, I will change my mind. But in the meantime, what I'm seeing right now is there has been a big, how do you call it, a reduction in the wage gap between men and women.
Yes.
It means that having a husband around is not that important. Also, being a woman and being a single woman is much better in society and much easier than before. This morning, when I woke up in the morning in Cambridge, I had to take my Uber. I picked my Uber at 4:30 a.m. And while I was waiting for the Uber, this young lady passed in front of me. And I was thinking, that's good that we live in a society where a young lady can walk up at 4:30 a.m. in the street, and it's as natural as any other possible thing. So that's good. I like to live in a society where that happens. And but that means that you don't need a husband. You don't need a husband unless you want to.
Yes.
So if you are in Mexico and it happens to be the case that 25% of potential husbands are people who are going to cheat on you, who are going to beat you up at home with domestic violence, and who are going to take all their wages and go to the cantina and drink everything, why do you want to, put up with that?
Yeah, exactly. I agree. 100%.
So I think that, and that links a little bit what we were saying with the teenage boys, and I think we are having in a lot of societies, we are having a real problem with around 20-25% of young males that they are not really being socialized in the correct way, and we can have a discussion about it. So I think a lot of women are just not willing to do it, and I understand why they don't want to do it. I think that a second possibility, which is related, is that you don't want to become any longer slaves to your husband. And I think that explains a lot of East Asia. So it's still the case that in South Korea, just as an example, and I'm not going to name any names, but I was hearing the other day about this guy who still insists that both the husband and the wife have PhDs in economics. Okay, so you are talking about people with papers in top 5 journals, and that the husband still insists that every dinner should be, that Chinese like these big dinners with like 5 different dishes and a soup, and the guy still insists we need to have 5 dishes and a soup for dinner.
Yes.
And you're like, no, maybe not. Okay, maybe we can order pizza tonight. And the husband says no. So I can perfectly understand why that woman, instead of having married to that person 20-30 years ago, will be now graduate students and a top program in the US will say, no, honey, we are not doing that. Okay, so if that's what you expect out of this marriage, I'm sorry, but we are not getting married. And the third possibility is simply that culture has changed and that people just find less fulfillment in having kids and in having a family. And then the fourth one maybe is everything related with housing, or maybe we were talking about this progression through careers that is much harder, etc. So I think that is a combination of bad husbands, culture change, and housing prices. And what I would like to know is a little bit how much of these 3 things contributes.
Okay, so I want to agree and then raise questions. So firstly, I would say I think that bad husbands are subjective. So I don't know if the quality of husbands have changed, but
Yes,
rather women can earn more. They're no longer stigmatized for remaining single. So now they can reject those quote unquote
yes,
bad
exactly,
husbands.
exactly.
So, the guys would be cheating and beating you up 50 years ago. No
You don't need to
difference.
have
Yeah,
a
yeah.
window.
100%. And I totally agree. So I think in both Latin America and rich, culturally liberalizing East Asia, you have
Yeah,
women increasing their earnings, becoming more culturally liberated, and deciding to remain single and reject these guys. And I think we see right across East Asia, there are these very persistent gaps in the gender share of care work. So
mm,
if men are just not, if you don't think that men are going to do their share, if you think that they're going to abandon you, cheat on you, and not be very supportive, why would you take that massive hit of doing the low status work and ending up? No, you wouldn't do it. But
yeah,
then I think we have a further question to explain highly conservative societies,
mhm,
like we mentioned Tunisia. So most Tunisians are still quite religious and conservative.
yeah,
Women are still earning much less or not working at all. This weekend I'm going to Malaysia, and it's
mhm,
in a very religiously conservative society where women are earning much less, not necessarily working. And so the question is, why are these kinds of societies
yeah,
where women are not liberated, where singles are still massively, massively stigmatized right across India and Tunisia and
yeah,
Malaysia. So the
yeah.
question is, what's driving the decline in fertility there?
Okay,
And
so
I wonder to what extent. And you say, oh, maybe it's just culture that having large families isn't so important. But I wonder if we push harder on the economics here,
yeah,
what do you think of the hypothesis that as we see automation and a rising premium for skills, with skills-based
yeah,
technological change, that getting your kids to those very top universities, to those very top schools, becomes even more important? And we see this rise in what the Doepke and Zilbotti highlighted, this
yeah,
intensive parenting.
yeah, yeah,
And I was doing some little analysis of, well, value survey data. One of their questions is, do you
mhm,
worry about your children's education, or do you worry about your kids?
yeah.
And even Malaysians, 65% of Malaysians really worry about their kids' future. And I worry if that kind of anxiety, that negativity, that despair, that despondency, it means two things. One, it means I'm going to have to invest massively as a parent in that educational
Mhm.
arms race. Two, is if I'm uncertain about whether they'll have a happy life or whether I'm having a happy life, people may, opt not to do it, or to only have one of them.
Oh no, no. I mean, I look. You are preaching to the converted. So I have. Uh, this is kind of a variation of the Barrow-Baker model of quality quantity
Right,
trade-off
sure,
with a
sure, sure.
skill bias technological change. And if I can just brag a little bit, I think I have a very nice paper with Nessie Gunner at Fenfi and with Matt Delveltal, who is now in the industry, and we basically make this point. And we have a very nice model where we basically have is technological diffusion. And what we argue is that a country like Malaysia is in this type of funny situation where a skill premium or skill is very well rewarded because, in some sense, they have access to a world technology that is ahead of their technological level. This is, remember, in development theory in the 1960s, where they talk about whether a technology or not is appropriate. So, in some sense, the rewards for a skill in Malaysia are too high for the good of Malaysia. And that people in Malaysia are responding to that by having very few kids. And we have the model and we calibrate it to this technological diffusion. And I think we do a really, really good job at forecasting a lot of these
Wait, slow
countries.
slow this down. I'm not as
I know,
fast
I
as
know, I
you.
know a
What
lot of.
does it mean to have the level of technologies is too high?
Okay, so maybe Malaysia, given their level of productivity, their level of human capital, the level of physical capital, is not a very good idea for them to have a lot of kids who learn Python, like the programming language.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay? Maybe what they need is more kids who learn like very basic accounting so they can get accounting right. But now, because we are in a world economy, if my kid learns Python, can work, as you were saying, through Zoom for a company in
Oh,
China.
right. Okay, so you can tap into the global production networks with demand for online skills.
Exactly.
Right. So I can be the online KPMG guy who can outdo your Madrid guys.
Exactly. And I can, so it turns out to be the case that in a closed world, Malaysia will not invest so much in computer scientists, but in an integrated economy, in some sense, is investing too much. And because, in addition to it, not only that, is because if you get one of those jobs as a Python programmer in Malaysia, you're going to be so rich in comparison with everyone else in Malaysia that this becomes the ultimate high stakes game. If I'm just the one who gets my kid into Google Research Lab in Malaysia, local office, he's going to have such a nice life that I'm willing to do absolutely anything. And, we see that in the rise of private tutors, in the normal obsession. And in my paper, we exactly make that point. So I'm not at all against that view of the world. I'm only trying to say that view of the world, to me, is a little bit harder to fit with what has happened in Colombia over the last 10 years.
Yeah, sure.
Okay? So if you are telling me, fertility is going down in Malaysia, fertility is going down in Tunisia, fertility is going down in Turkey, they are still very conservative societies along a lot of dimensions. I think that a simple version of Barrow-Becker quality-quantity trade-off model within the context of an integrated economy gets the job done.
Yes. And I think the quality-quantity trade-off, there's a very nice paper, I don't know if you've seen it, by Phoebe Ishaq, where she looks at religious heterogeneity within sub-Saharan Africa, and she finds that Muslim women systematically tend to have more children, and she finds that's because men tend to value more children and women have less autonomy. So men want big families and they tend to be much more religious, so they're not so concerned about investing in the educational quality aspect of each child, but they're I think that's certainly a big issue. But I don't think it's a problem to have a slightly globally heterogeneous explanation of what's going on. I think it's fine to say Latin American women have these issues with machista men, and it's slightly different in East Asia.
We are social scientists. Our goal is try to understand the world, and if you need, if you need two theories, you need two theories. What can you do? Well, so my point is very simple. Just to summarize it, quantity-quality trade-off does a great job with Tunisia. I think it's very difficult to use a quality-quantity trade-off model to explain the collapse of fertility in Chile over the last 5 years.
For sure. I'm with you.
Yes, because nothing has changed in Chile in terms of the economic conditions in 5 years in such a fast way. And I think that's something related with culture, machistas, etc. I think needs to play part of a role. But who knows? Maybe you interview me in 5 years and I have changed my mind.
No. I'm super with you. And I think, and I go back to I was in Sardinia and I was in Catalonia, and I think another issue that I would just emphasize through my interviews at least is, young people's sense of insecurity in Southern Europe, right? So that's a slightly different story to the US story, but that just sense of, young men who are still living with their parents at 30, Spaniards who are, 2/3 of young Spaniards are in temporary jobs.
Yeah.
All that precarity creates a lot of anxiety. And then you have Italian women who are, one, they've got that anxiety, and then they've got these guys who are like not going to do the washing up.
Yeah, exactly. So it's piling stuff over stuff. And in the case of Spain and Italy, I know, because I have been looking at it, that this correlates, as you say, low fertility correlates a lot with the fact that we have a screw-up labor market institutions. And we have had screw-up labor market institutions for 50 years, and there doesn't seem to be any political willingness to change them. So life is complex, and we are going to have slightly different explanations, but that's okay. It only highlights that, I'm going to quote Bob Lucas, once start thinking about these things, it's hard to think about anything else.
Okay, now I want the uplifting, positive message from you about how we fix this.
Okay. So I think we can build societies that are more family-friendly and more kid-friendly without infringing on the liberty of anyone. Okay? I want societies where young women find good husbands and they freely decide to get married with them, and they freely decide to have kids. So, I just want to be sure, because sometimes this is very easy to, make a cartoonish statement.
Yeah.
I want to increase freedom, not to reduce.
Absolutely. So can you give me some? So 100% we want this. We want to create
Yes,
We can
yes.
say all these nice things, like you and I, totally supportive gender equality, totally supportive of people's freedoms. How do you create, in a political economy way, an enabling environment for good husbands and happy
Exactly.
families?
So first of all, I think home prices. This is very important. There is also a second issue about. So we need to build. Look, it cannot be the case. I was reading. Now I'm quoting from the top of my head, like some working paper that some think tank in the UK put together about the fact that the UK hasn't really built that many houses since World War II. Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, of course, you go you go to Oxford and all the prices are like, oh my God. But yeah, if you haven't built really that much since 1945, what do you expect is going to happen? Okay. So we need to build much more. A second subtle issue that I haven't seen that much emphasized by economists, but I actually think is very important. We also need to build houses that are children friendly. So a lot of the new construction in the US is in high rises and very small apartments. And that actually makes life very difficult to
But is
have
that
kids.
not catering to demand?
In part, yes, but a lot of that has to do with zoning regulations. So there is this. So in urbanism and in this type of city planning beyond the wall, they are very anti-urban sprawl. So in the
Oh, yeah.
1990s, urban sprawl became the worst. It was Nazis and urban sprawl. Those were like the two main enemies of humanity. So even in my neighborhood, there is much more dense building now than in the past, and this is totally because the city council in the US zoning is very local. The city council got completely co-opted by these people of we need more density. And I think that is and I'm again coming back to the issue of freedom. If the market is demanding a high density housing, that's fine with me. But I also think that a lot of people will rather have a little bit of a single house or a terrace house, and those are much better for kids. And I think there is a little bit of evidence that this actually matters. So housing, not only in price, but also in the type of housing that you have. Husbands. Well, we were
Okay, wait,
saying.
wait, wait. I just want to push back. Let's just, I mean, okay, so I totally agree that there are a host of NIMBYist restrictions and
Yes,
house prices are super, super high. And I think that if you bring down house prices, one that makes housing more affordable, it makes families more affordable, and it could also give young people more hope for the future. Like if you feel that the system is against you, if you feel that your wage is still making you do a 2-hour
yeah,
commute, then it's just inhospitable.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
think that I am fully in support of a housing agenda.
Actually, let me give you another piece of evidence for
Okay.
that. So over the weekend, I was in a conference, and it was a conference that tried to put together things from politics and economics. And there was actually a guy who is an expert on polling, and he was telling me that one of the most surprising things he has discovered in this election cycle in the US is that one of the questions that really worries college students in the US is housing prices, and that one of the biggest frustrations he gets when he's polling these young undergraduates in the US is how unhappy they are with both political parties, that neither of them seems to think this is a big problem. Which I thought it was very interesting because you read the Standard, the New York Times, the Washington Post,
Mm,
and they say, "Oh, young voters care about X," and he
mm.
was telling me, "No, no, this is what the journalist at the New York Times thinks the young voters care about.
Yeah.
When you actually, or maybe his or her daughter cares about,
But let me
but
let me push back. I want to push back. So,
yeah,
you make housing cheaper, you could make boyfriends even less attractive because if more young
yeah,
women can
no,
afford their own housing,
no, no, no,
then
no, that's
husbands
fair
better
enough.
be really,
That's
really
fair enough.
good
No,
before
but
you're forced to live with them.
exactly. But now we go to the second point, which is improvements in education. And I think that countries all across the world are really failing with this 20%, 25% at the bottom of men. They are not giving them good skills. Skills both in terms of cognitive abilities, like, I know how to do something, I know how to get a good job, but also in terms of non-cognitive skills. First of all, I know how to be a good husband in a situation where I'm not the boss and the wife is my mate, but in a situation where both of that, and I'm not going to claim that, this is easy to do, but at least think a little bit in ways where we can transmit this idea. And and again, I don't want to do it in a very heavy-handed way because I think there is evidence that there is some backlash to this. I think there is evidence that boys react in a very negative way on this type of interventions. But at least think about ways in which you can do it that are constructive. So if we can get really a lot of these boys into making them into better husbands, this will help already. Okay? So
I
yeah,
fully support, and I don't think it needs to be an anti-male agenda. I think,
exactly.
and I think part of it's not just about making men less sexist or less patriarchal, though that is obviously important, but also I think social skill development is really important. And this could even be a threat by AI, because if lots of people spend a lot of their time playing computer games, maybe 5 hours a day, 7 hours a day, or passively strolling on your phone, then you're not developing the all-important capacities to charm, to make jokes. Like when I interview women all around the world, they often say that these dating apps fall apart because men aren't funny, they're not entertaining, the conversation is dull. Like, hi, how are you? How was your day? Like, who wants to reply? You know, who's going to go on a date with that guy? No one.
The Darth Vader approach to dating.
Hello, how are you?
Exactly. No, but I can see why. Look, I can even tell among the undergraduates here at Penn, I will say that in general, their conversational abilities are lower than 20 years ago. Just when they come to my office, how they address me. And don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they come to my office and they say, "Dear Professor Villaverde, I respectfully." No, just, they come to my office and they chat about the class. Just the way they build the sentences is much worse than in the past. And I think that a lot of it has exactly what you were saying. They have spent 20 years of their life playing with the iPhone and texting like TY, see you later, like all those type of things.
But we know there's been a decline in socializing. We know that young people are going out less, they're going to parties less, and people, the rise of instant personalized entertainment means that the leisure goods are so much better in my house. Like I can watch any film I want, I can do anything I like, and I don't have to chat to people. So I'm not developing these skills.
And although I'm going to add only one thing, at least in the US universities, for instance, places like Penn have really clamped down on things like parties among the undergrads. They have put so many regulations, and that it's nearly impossible to have now fun parties like 30 years ago.
Well, I mean, in some sense, I'm sympathetic to that because there were these, historically very high rates of alcohol and sexual abuse.
No, I know, but there is like everything, you can overdo it.
Yes,
so
yeah, and I think, going back to the point about social skills. So, for example, if we look at East Asia, there's a very strong commitment to education and meritocracy. So as a result, students really cram for very quantified exams. So they're learning the script, they're learning what they have to do, and they're not getting these opportunities to charm. Like I think charm is so important.
No, and in fact that goes back also to a point that you mentioned a couple of times with a couple of questions before about the educational arms race. It is that kids cannot be kids anymore. They get out of high school at 3:00, and then you need to take them to football practice and then to piano practice, and they don't have time to explore the world, to read books. Of course, they are not going to be interesting. For God's sake, they have not watched a single interesting movie ever because they don't have time. So yesterday, I was talking about with someone at Harvard, and we were talking about, I was trying to mention some of the I really love classic American movies from the 1940s and 1950s, 1960s. They have not watched any of those.
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily the failure that's destroying the dating market or lack of 19. But I really think it's the social skills. Like there are so many young. I think it's the passive entertainment. Like in the past, if you wanted fun, you had to go and see your friends on Friday night.
But what I mean is
more classical American movies.
Exactly. No, but it gives you, so what I was trying to say is it gives you a range by watching beautiful movies, but it can be movies or it can be theater plays, but it gives you, or read good novels, it gives you a wider perspective on human experience and helps you to understand better other people and how to engage in conversation and have cultural references and be able to sympathize and empathize. I think the correct word is empathize here. Empathize more with another person. And since they have never had that experience because the only thing they did was to play Call of Duty for 14 hours, it's not that they don't even know how to charm your date, it's that they don't even know how to talk with consumer office when they call on the phone to say that there is a problem with electricity service.
Okay, so now let's talk about government coordination. So let us agree that there's been a rising quality of leisure goods, a rising quality of personal instant entertainment, which means I don't have to go and spend time with other people in order to have fun. I can just do it on my own with my gamer headset. How does the government step in to solve that coordination problem, where the coordination problem is, say, dating and long-term relationship stability?
So the only thing I can really think about the government doing is trying to limit the education weapons race.
Right.
Try to get kids more time. I think that especially at the very top of the distribution, a lot of kids are basically working 16 hours a day. And we need to change the way we do
But those are in the US. Those aren't the ones who are having lower fertility. The fertility is highest amongst the high educated groups, right?
Yes, no, but I think that also creates a lot of anxiety down the ladder, because then they are very worried about
Catching up. Yes, the Michelle Tilt paper on status externalities in Korea. Yeah,
status externalities. So I think that lowering the education weapons race will help. I have had some thoughts about how to do it. But we cannot be in a situation really where it's so difficult for people to have kids around because you feel you need to, push them through good high schools. And again, going back to the point, this is really a race where the poor people suffer much more than the rich people. And there is nothing more unequal in the United States that the fact that universities, and I'm very critical with the top elite universities in the US, they want to have this well-rounded, holistic approach where they look at your CV and, you created this not-for-profit organization. Oh, come on, give me a break. If you created a not-for-profit organization when you were 14 years old, it's because your father is a McKinsey partner and he did it for you. Okay, let's be honest about this.
Okay, but how do you solve this education arms race if we agree that it's a response to the skills premium? If we take on board Daron's arguments about, the higher payoff to, the people who are super, super high skilled, they can harness technology, they can be super, super productive, whether it's in Malaysia or Penn. How do you reduce that arms race?
A couple of possibilities, and these are just ideas I'm going to throw. Okay, I'm not particularly committed to any of those, and I'm more than happy to be convinced that they may not work. But a couple of things I have been playing with is, for instance, let's suppose that the college entry exam goes from 0 to 10. 10 is the best possible mark. And let's suppose we sit down and we say, look, we think that to get into Oxford or to get into Princeton, you need to get an 8. If you are above 8, between an 8.1 and an 8.5, there is no difference. Let's do the following. We are going to test you, everyone who is above 8, then we just run a lottery.
So then we have a collective action problem with Princeton, Harvard, and Yale agreeing collectively to accept the 8s. Why would they do that?
No, I know. This will be easier. No, but this will be much easier to do in countries like South Korea, where the government can enforce this.
Okay. But still, you have a competition, Yonsei, etc., so national.
No, but again, let's do that. Let's pass a national legislation that this is how Johnson and Son national. Yeah. And that's it. And if they don't like it, I'm sorry. We are South Korea. We do things here. We coordinate.
So now you're back to our totalitarian fix. Okay, right? Yeah.
Totalitarian. Not totalitarian. It's a natural.
Okay, a coordination issue. Okay, all right. Then you get your coordination issue. Right?
And in universities in the US, for instance, in public universities, I think that the state's legislatures could mandate them to do things, for instance, like get students from every county. Get the students, and I'm a big fan. For instance, Texas has tried to do that, and I think it has worked well. Let's be sure that in our entering class of Texas Austin, we have students that represent, there is at least like 3 students for every county in Texas. And that means that you are not so obsessed in being the absolute best in the whole state of Texas. You only need to be the best within your county. And the good thing in addition to it is that internalizes also a little bit the fact that you may be in a county that doesn't have the advantages of other counties. Okay, and we can think again, as I was mentioning before, we can think about some of the details of how we exactly do this to avoid people gaming the system. You move from one county to the other just because it's easier for you to get into a school, things like that. But I think there are ways in which we can nudge universities into not being obsessed into this, I get you into Penn because you created a not-for-profit organization when you were 16. That's just crazy. Okay, I'm using that example because I actually was talking once with a friend of mine who was in this interview committee for Stanford, and they have this kid who is, has created a not-for-profit organization to provide shoes for people in the third world, in Africa. And you say, how in the world a 16-year-old kid has created an international not-for-profit? Uh, you know, Look, do I believe there is like maybe one kid in the planet like that? Perhaps. But out of curiosity, he put his name on Google, and in fact, the father was a senior partner at McKinsey.
Right.
So who did the work? I mean, let's be honest. Who did the work? Okay. And yet Stanford values this a lot. So how we can, and we need to think, as you say, Stanford is a private institution. How can we nudge them into doing this thing? But even just, I think the public pressure and the awareness in society that things need to be done in a little bit may nudge these universities in the right direction. In the case of China, they have gone the very heavy-handed approach of just prohibiting academia.
Yeah, but I think that's just they prohibited the private school. But this is, I would push back. You're the economist here, but when parents are so committed to getting their kids to the top, like parents are so committed, they'll do absolutely anything for their kids.
I know,
if you block one road, they just find the shortcut. So South
so
Korea.
I fully agree with you. So maybe let's try to think about exams that is difficult to cram for them. Exams that, and I think that people in education have been thinking about these issues where, we are going to test things that, maybe you can prep for a couple of hours, but the marginal return of cramming for another 10 hours is going to be close to zero or zero.
But South Koreans, I was when I was in Seoul, I interviewed lots of South Korean bureaucrats who are in the Ministry of Education, and the issue is that because people are so committed to meritocracy and fairness, they want these very quantifiable tests.
No, I know.
And so there's just such a host of political economy reasons. Like, and if you block rich, committed parents from achieving it one way, they'll just hoo.
Yeah, exactly, and do it some other way. I know. This is a challenge, but Okay, let me put it in this way, Alice. We need to try something.
Yeah.
Let's try a few.
But what about your Call of Duty men? What's your fix for men? Because like when we were going through the explanations, you were identifying the supply of men as a major issue. So we need to fix that one too.
I think that we really need in the educational system to offer them things that they get engaged on. I think that right now and I can tell, a lot of the courses are right now designed in ways that are just not very engaging to people. Let me give you a simple example. As far as I can tell, Penn doesn't offer a single course on military history. Okay, now I understand why they do that. They think military history is about violence, it's about blah, 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 blah. Guess what? A lot of 17-year-olds are really very interested in military history.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe if we go to high school where people are not that interested, and then you go and start talking about World War II and planes and tanks and weapons, a lot of kids are going to be interested. And I think we did that. And look, let me give you an example from the humanities. It is true that in the past, we offer humanities courses that were not very sensitive towards the preferences and the interests of large chunks of the population. Okay, this was Herodotus and Thucydides. And if you didn't happen to be from the Greek inheritance, a male of a Western country, I'm sorry. And we changed that. Well, that's fine, but maybe we have overdone it in the sense that now we don't offer a single course on things that a lot of guys are interested on. And so maybe we can do that. Maybe we
so
can
that fix would be to help more men get to university. What's that fix for? The military history. What's that problem solving?
To get men interested in academic work or just scholarly.
So this is to solve the issue that a lot of young men are not achieving as high in terms of reading and math, and so they're dropping out. So you think that if there was more military history, that you could bump up the numbers of men getting to university?
Yeah, well, military history or topics or keeping them in high school or taking like an A-level, another A-level. If there is a nice A-level on military history, you may get some of these guys to take that class while you are not going to convince them to take the A-level in English Lit.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, I'm saying just military history as an example. I could think about many other things where a lot of young kids, especially from working class and lower income class, they are going to find more interesting. And you are going to tell them, look, this is something that is fun for you. There is something in the educational system for you that is just not boring chit-chat. and it's actually more fun than playing Call of Duty.
Yeah, I
And
100% agree that education should be fun, engaging, and get people on board.
yes,
On Netflix, you can find out what shows are trending in each country. And one of the
yeah,
top trending shows in Saudi Arabia is the Netflix show Vikings, which is all about
yeah,
men being violent,
yeah,
and
exactly.
they
So
love
if you
it.
Yeah, exactly. So you go to local high school in maybe not a great place here in Center City, Philadelphia, and you offer because these are precisely the places where men are doing really badly.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, for sure.
you try to sit them and try to. I'm going to actually mention a poet that I really like, Emily Dickinson. But you're a 16-year-old boy, and I give you a poem of Emily Dickinson. It's just not going to click on you.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
it's
then we
not going.
have another issue, sorry to interrupt, is
Yeah,
that what's the percentage of teachers in the US who are now female? So I think
yeah,
that,
exactly.
and
No,
these
no,
people are
exactly.
shaping the curricula. So it's actually this weekend, I went to my secondary school,
Yeah,
and one thing really shocked me. I said, so this was a very liberal, international,
yeah,
progressive
yeah.
school. It wasn't a stuffy UK school, but super liberal. And I was very surprised to see this big billboard, queer cool history. So like
Yeah.
having queer, that's a big change.
Yeah.
But I think as you get a lot more women teachers, then
Yes.
then education is going to reflect women's concerns.
Yes.
And those women are
Exactly.
probably not going to be teaching so that, as you say earlier, there's a lot of ways in which government can step in to address some of these coordination issues.
Exactly.
If women teachers are doing queer history, that might not necessarily appeal to the military history types.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe because in a lot of occasions the only thing that you need to do is to tell the kid that learning is fun. And
Yeah.
maybe after he gets into, we are going to learn how the Vikings built swords to cut the heads of people.
Yeah.
Then maybe one day he's going to say, oh, let me understand why the Vikings decided to go on raiding. And next thing you know, this guy's a social historian.
Yeah. Okay, I'm with that. The Jesus fun hit theory of change.
Exactly, and I fully agree with you that the curriculum has steered too much in one direction, and it's just that a lot of kids just don't think that academic work has anything to do with them anymore.
Yeah, it's boring.
It's boring. It doesn't appeal to them. It deals with issues, and that is not. And coming back to your point, someone was mentioning to me the other day. I don't know if this is true or not. That Norway is really taking very seriously this fact that you cannot have education, primary school education, where 90% of the primary school education teachers are female, are women. That you want to have something that is much more 50-50 or 60-40.
Yeah, for sure. And Finland had a quota to try and back up the male teachers.
Exactly, and because again, if a kid goes to school, I mean, it's kind of funny because this is exactly the same argument that we pushed back in the day to have more females. You want to have more role models,
Yeah.
but it also goes on the other direction. So if you go to the situation where you go to academia, to school, and like 95% of the teachers are women, and you're a boy, you are going to think, well, this is not for me. For me, is play Call of Duty and run with my car.
Yeah.
So the absence of role models can cut in both directions.
Absolutely. And not just the role models, but the content of the teaching and the way that you're marketing.
And you are doing it, and maybe we need to track people in different groups, and if I think that tracking them is done in a thoughtful way, is not the taboo that it has become in many places, and that can be good for everyone.
Okay, awesome. So I want to quickly sum up, and you tell me where I'm wrong. So we think that fertility and demographics are changing globally, and this matters because the size of the working age population means lots of people with innovation, ideas, and that's important for growth, that's important for output, that's important for pensions, that's important for public services. And this may be happening, one, because you've got women able to be more selective, and also the quality-quantity trade-off. And then so the ways we can address this is thinking about the educational arms race, and also making education more fun so that men stay engaged and on the ball.
Yeah.
And housing, cheaper housing.
And housing, cheaper and more convenient housing.
Yes, family, making society ready and supportive for families.
Yeah. Yes.
While respecting everyone's freedoms.
While respecting everyone's freedom. Exactly. No, this is very important. I'm a big believer in human freedom.
I'm fully on board. Okay, Jesus, this was a tremendous honor, privilege.
Of course, no, the other way around. So kind of you to think about me to talk about this.
Oh, come on. Okay, all right. Well, I will keep out for all your forthcoming wonderful papers on this. So thank you very, very much for sharing your insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
Okay, perfect. So I have just stopped that. And if you just stay on the line until it says 100%, you